The fluorescent lights of Eastwood Financial Group hummed quietly above as Thomas Rivera pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway. It was just past 11 p.m., and the 60-story building had emptied hours ago, leaving behind only crumpled papers, coffee rings on desks, and forgotten umbrella stands. Thomas moved with a steady rhythm born from 3 years of night shifts. His blue uniform slightly faded but clean, just like the floors he polished each night. At 38, Thomas had the strong build of someone who worked with his hands and the tired eyes of someone who rarely got enough sleep. His dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, a detail his 10-year-old daughter Zoe loved to tease him about on weekend mornings when they made pancakes together in their small apartment kitchen, going gray because you worry too much. "Dad," she'd say, standing on a kitchen chair to reach for the maple syrup. She wasn't wrong. Thomas sprayed glass cleaner on the conference room windows, watching his reflection blur and clear as he wiped in careful circles. 3 years ago, his wife Elena had died after a swift and brutal battle with cancer, leaving him alone to raise their daughter. The medical bills had drained what little savings they had. His previous job as a music teacher at a private school couldn't cover their new reality. So he'd taken the night janitor position, better pay, benefits, and hours that let him see Zoe off to school and be there when she got home. The sacrifice was sleep, and sometimes dignity. "Good evening, Mr. Rivera," called the night security guard, an older gentleman named Joe who was the only person in the building who consistently used Thomas's name. "How's that daughter of yours doing with her science project?" Thomas brightened immediately. "She won first place, Joe. Built a working model of the solar system with lights and everything. Got it all herself from watching videos online. Smart like her dad," Joe nodded, continuing his rounds. Thomas didn't correct him. The truth was Zoe had inherited her mother's quick mind and artistic talent. From Thomas she'd gotten his stubbornness and, unfortunately, his unruly curls that were impossible to tame in the morning rush. What Joe didn't know, what nobody at Eastwood Financial knew, was that Thomas Rivera wasn't always just the cleaning guy. Once upon a time, he had been a promising pianist, accepted to the prestigious Colburn Conservatory of Music in Los Angeles on a full scholarship. For 3 glorious years his fingers had danced across keys instead of mop handles, and his future had seemed as bright and limitless as the California sky. Then he'd met Elena, a dance student with a laugh that made his heart stop, during a collaborative performance. By their senior year they were married and expecting Zoe. Thomas had taken a leave of absence intending to return, but life happened in all its complicated beauty. Teaching music at a small private school had been a good compromise, still connected to his passion while providing for his family until cancer came and rewrote their story entirely. Thomas wheeled his cart toward the executive floor. He normally saved this area for last, the plush carpeting and expensive furniture requiring special care. The executives generated less mess too, with their minimalist desks and paperless workflows. Still, their trash cans filled with premium coffee cups and meal delivery containers needed emptying just the same. The top floor featured a magnificent lobby with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. During the day, sunlight poured across the marble floors and illuminated the crown jewel of the space, a stunning 9-foot concert grand piano in glossy black. It was purely decorative, a status symbol for the company that had apparently paid a small fortune to have it delivered by crane through the window when the building was first completed. Thomas had never once seen anyone play it. But oh, how his fingers itched every time he dusted it. Tonight, as he carefully wiped down its gleaming surface, he allowed himself to lift the fallboard covering the keys. No harm in looking, he reasoned. The floor was empty, and he'd be done with his shift in an hour. Zoe was sleeping over at her best friend's house, a rare Friday night when he didn't need to rush home. The perfect white and black keys seemed to glow under the dimmed evening lights. Thomas glanced around nervously, then set down his dustcloth. He hadn't touched a real piano in nearly 2 years. Their apartment couldn't fit even an upright, so he made do with a digital keyboard he kept under Zoe's bed, pulling it out some evenings after she fell asleep. With headphones on, he would play for an hour or two, keeping his technique alive while making sure not to wake his daughter or annoy the neighbors. But a digital keyboard was to this magnificent instrument what a photograph of the ocean was to swimming in its depths. Just one chord, he told himself, just to hear how it sounds. Thomas lowered himself onto the bench, surprised by how familiar it felt despite the years away. He positioned his hands in a simple C major chord and pressed down gently. The sound bloomed in the empty lobby like a flower opening in time-lapse, rich, resonant, and perfectly in tune. Thomas closed his eyes involuntarily, feeling the vibrations travel up his arms and into his chest. Without conscious thought, his left hand began a gentle walking bass line while his right added a simple melody. It was nothing fancy, just an old jazz standard his father had taught him when he was 12. But the piano responded to his touch with such warmth that it nearly brought tears to his eyes. He allowed himself 30 seconds, maybe less, before reluctantly lifting his hands and closing the fallboard. The last notes hung in the air like a question left unanswered. "Didn't know they hired entertainment for the cleaning crew," came a voice from behind him. Thomas jumped to his feet, heart pounding. A woman in her mid-40s stood by the elevator, arms crossed over an expensive-looking blazer. Her employee badge identified her as Lisa Winters, VP of Marketing. Her expression was unreadable, but Thomas recognized the slight tilt of her head, curiosity mixed with surprise. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, reaching for his cart. I shouldn't have touched it. I've been here 6 years and I've never heard that piano played," she said, walking closer. "Company spent a fortune on it as a statement piece. Honestly, thought it might be just for show, not even real." "It's real," Thomas said softly, "and perfectly maintained." "You play professionally?" she asked, glancing at his janitorial uniform with obvious confusion. Thomas felt heat rise to his face. "Not anymore. Just a hobby now." A half-truth that hurt to say out loud. Lisa nodded slowly. "Well, don't let me interrupt your cleaning. Good night." She disappeared down a hallway, leaving Thomas with a knot in his stomach. Would she report him? He couldn't risk losing this job, not with Zoe's braces coming up and rent increases looming. He quickly finished dusting and moved on to vacuum the executive offices, working faster than usual. When his shift ended at midnight, he changed out of his uniform in the small janitor's closet that doubled as his locker room. The bus ride home was quiet. The city settled into its late-night rhythm. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of an aging building in a neighborhood that was neither dangerous nor particularly nice. Thomas unlocked the door to emptiness. No Zoe tonight with her homework questions or bedtime negotiations for just 5 more minutes of reading. He made himself a sandwich, too tired to cook anything proper. The silence of the apartment pressed in around him. On the refrigerator, held by magnetic fruit-shaped clips, were Zoe's latest artwork and a permission slip for an upcoming field trip to the Natural History Museum that needed his signature. Next to them hung a faded photograph of Elena holding newborn Zoe, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. "You should have seen this piano, Elena," he whispered to the empty kitchen, Bosendorfer Imperial. The sound was like that time we snuck into Symphony Hall after hours. He could almost hear her laugh. "You and your pianos, Thomas." After eating, he pulled out the digital keyboard and set it up on the kitchen table. With headphones on, he began to play, really play, working through the piece that had been forming in his head during the bus ride home. It was something new, a melody that spoke of longing and of hope, of late-night bus rides and the weight of a sleeping child carried up 3 flights of stairs. Tomorrow, Zoe would come home with stories from her sleepover, and they'd go grocery shopping together, making their weekly game of finding the best deals and planning meals. Tomorrow he would just be dad again, the guy who made terrible dad jokes and helped with math homework and never, ever let on how much he missed the feeling of a real piano responding to his touch. But tonight, in the quiet apartment with its thin walls and creaky floors, Thomas Rivera played as if performing for a packed concert hall, his fingers remembering what his life had forced him to forget. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, a new piece of music took shape, one that would, though he couldn't know it yet, change everything in the months to come. 2 weeks passed without incident. Thomas continued his nightly cleaning routine, carefully avoiding the grand piano in the executive lobby. Sometimes when the floor was empty, he would pause beside it, letting his hand hover just above the glossy surface without touching. But the memory of Lisa Winters catching him at the keys kept him from lifting the fallboard again. "Dad, you're doing that thing with your fingers again," Zoe said one morning over breakfast. She mimicked him, drumming her small fingers against the kitchen table in the same pattern he hadn't realized he was tapping. Thomas smiled sheepishly and passed her the cereal box. Just an old habit. How's the science project coming along? It's about sound waves and music, she said, pouring herself a second bowl. At 10, Zoe was always hungry, always growing. I'm going to show how different instruments make different wave patterns. Can I use your keyboard for it? Of course, Thomas said, checking his watch. Bus comes in 15 minutes. Got your homework? The morning routine carried them through. Teeth brushing, hair combing, the search for a missing shoe that turned up under the couch. Thomas walked Zoe to the bus stop, waited until she boarded with a final wave, and then headed home for a few hours of sleep before his shift. That evening, as Thomas pushed his cart onto the executive floor, he noticed unusual activity. The lights in the main conference room were on, and through the glass walls he could see caterers setting up a buffet table. A bar was being assembled in one corner. Big party tonight, Joe the security guard explained when Thomas asked. Company landed some huge investment deal. CEO's hosting a celebration for the executives and major clients. Thomas nodded. This happened occasionally. Late-night events that meant working around partygoers who barely noticed him as he emptied trash bins or cleaned up spills. He would start with the lower floors tonight and finish with the executive level after their party wound down. But at 10:30 p.m., as Thomas worked his way through the 58th floor, his phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Zoe not feeling well. Fever 101. I checked on her when I heard coughing. She's asking for you. Thomas immediately called Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had a spare key and often looked in on Zoe during his night shifts. She just woke up burning up, Mrs. Chen explained. I gave her some children's Tylenol and a cool cloth for her head. I'll be right home, Thomas said, already heading toward the service elevator. Thank you for checking on her. He found his supervisor, explained the situation, and was told to go home to his sick child. Just come in early tomorrow to finish up, his supervisor said. Family first. 2 hours and one doctor's telemedicine call later, Zoe was diagnosed with a nasty case of flu, her fever reduced to 99 degrees, and she was finally sleeping again. Thomas sat by her bedside watching her breathe, remembering those first terrifying nights after Elena died when he would check constantly to make sure Zoe was still breathing. Dad? Zoe murmured, half asleep. Can you play the Moon Song? The Moon Song was a lullaby Thomas had composed when she was a baby. On their digital keyboard it never sounded quite right, but it still soothed her. Of course, sunshine, he said, gently stroking her hair. He played the melody softly with one hand, humming along until she drifted back to sleep. By morning, her fever had broken, but the doctor recommended she stay home from school for at least 2 days. Thomas called his supervisor again. I need to stay with my daughter today, he explained. She's got the flu. There was a long pause on the other end. We've got a problem, Rivera. The executive floor is a mess from last night's party, and the CEO is bringing in potential investors for a 9 a.m. meeting. I need that floor spotless. Can't your kid stay with someone else for a few hours? Thomas closed his eyes. My neighbor can check in, but my daughter is sick. She needs me here. Look, I understand family emergencies, but this is a crucial morning. The cleaning service can't send anyone else on short notice. His supervisor lowered his voice. This could affect your job review next month, Rivera. The unspoken threat hung in the air. Thomas looked at Zoe, who had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep, her cheeks still flushed. I'll figure something out, he finally said. I'll be there in an hour. After arranging for Mrs. Chen to watch Zoe, promising to be back by noon and leaving medicine instructions, Thomas caught the early bus to Eastwood Financial. The sky was just beginning to lighten, a different view of the city than his usual midnight commute. The executive floor looked like a hurricane had blown through. Empty champagne flutes littered every surface. Food trays had been abandoned half-eaten on leather couches. Someone had spilled red wine on the cream-colored carpet by the window, and in the center of it all stood his supervisor, looking harried. Thank God you're here, he said. The cleaning crew from the party bailed without doing anything. CEO's group arrives in 90 minutes. I'll help you with the trash. They worked frantically, Thomas focusing on the visible messes while his supervisor gathered garbage. The floor gradually transformed back to its usual immaculate state. I'll handle the rest, Thomas said, checking his watch. If he hurried, he could clean the remaining areas and still be home before noon as promised. You should get back downstairs, his supervisor hesitated. You sure? Go, Thomas insisted. I've got this. Alone again, Thomas moved quickly through the final tasks. He was vacuum cleaning the carpet by the elevator when the doors opened and 4 men stepped out. Thomas recognized 3 of them as executives from the marketing department. The 4th, a tall man with an expensive watch and disdainful expression, was unfamiliar. And as you can see, Harold, everything is top-notch here, one of the executives was saying. Only the best for our clients. The man called Harold barely glanced around. Impressive building, David, but I've seen nice views before. What I need to know is if your team can deliver the results you promised last night. Thomas quietly turned off the vacuum and began to roll up the cord, trying to make himself invisible. Well, well, said another executive. A heavy-set man Thomas knew was named Richard Parker. The cleaning guy is still here. His tone suggested Thomas was an unpleasant surprise, like gum found on the bottom of an expensive shoe. Thomas nodded politely. Just finishing up, sir. Did you clean the conference room? We have an important meeting, David asked, checking his Rolex. Yes, sir. Everything's ready. The men might have continued past him if not for Harold, who had wandered toward the grand piano. He ran a finger along its edge, then looked back at the group. Anyone here play? He asked. Beautiful instrument. The executives exchanged glances. It's mainly decorative, David admitted. Part of the building's original design. Harold nodded, unimpressed. Shame to have something like this and not use it. I played in college. Nothing serious, but I bet the cleaning guy plays. Richard suddenly exclaimed, his voice too loud, his smile too wide. Thomas realized the executives were still half drunk from the previous night's celebration. Don't you, buddy? You look like a real piano man. Thomas felt his face grow hot as 4 pairs of eyes turned to him. I should finish up so I can… Come on, Richard insisted, gesturing grandly toward the piano. Entertain us while we wait for the meeting. Show Harold how we treat our staff like family here. The suggestion was cruel, the expectation that he would embarrass himself apparent in Richard's smirk. Thomas thought of Zoe at home with a fever waiting for him. He thought of his job review coming up, the apartment's rising rent, Zoe's braces. I really need to finish. He tried again. That's an order, Richard said, no longer smiling. Consider it part of your duties today. The other executives looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Harold watched with detached curiosity, like a scientist observing an experiment. Thomas stood frozen, the vacuum cord still in his hands. If he refused, he risked his job. If he played poorly to avoid drawing attention, they would mock him anyway. And if he played well, he set down the vacuum cord and walked slowly to the piano, aware of the executives following. His work clothes felt suddenly shabby under their scrutiny. His hands, calloused from years of cleaning, seemed to belong to someone else. Thomas sat on the bench, feeling the weight of their expectations, expecting failure, expecting a joke at his expense. He thought of Zoe asking for the moon song, of Elena, who had always believed in his talent, of all the dreams he'd set aside. As he lifted the fallboard and positioned his fingers above the keys, Thomas made a decision. If they wanted him to play, he would play, not as the janitor they mocked, but as the musician he still was beneath it all. Thomas sat at the grand piano, acutely aware of the executives standing behind him, their expensive cologne mingling with the lingering scent of last night's party. His uniform felt scratchy against his neck. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, not from fear but from the rush of emotions flooding through him. He hadn't performed for an audience in 7 years. The last time had been at Elena's memorial service, where he'd played her favorite Debussy piece while Zoe, then just 3 years old, sat on his lap, too young to understand why everyone was crying. Richard Parker cleared his throat impatiently. Well, we don't have all day. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, shutting out their faces, their expectations, their assumptions. In that brief darkness, he saw Elena smiling at him from the front row of his student recital. He saw Zoe at home waiting for him to return. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. Not a simple tune as they'd expected. Not fumbling amateur chords. Thomas chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that started deceptively simple before revealing its true complexity. A piece that told a story of its own. The opening notes floated through the executive lobby, gentle, questioning, like the first raindrops before a storm. Thomas felt the familiar resistance of the keys, the beautiful weight of a real piano responding to his touch. so different from the lightweight plastic of his digital keyboard at home. Behind him, someone snickered, still expecting him to falter. Thomas ignored it, letting the music build gradually. His fingers remembered every note, every dynamic marking, every subtle shift in tempo. This piece had been part of his final recital at the conservatory, performed for professors who had believed he was destined for concert halls. As the music intensified, Thomas leaned into the emotion of it, the longing, the passion, the quiet determination. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, no longer stiff with self-consciousness. The muscle memory took over, transporting him beyond the gleaming executive floor with its judgmental audience. The laughter behind him had stopped. Thomas reached the middle section, where the piece grew more dramatic, more technically demanding. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the complex passages with a precision that surprised even him after so many years. Each note rang clear and true in the perfect acoustics of the lobby. People had begun to gather. Through half-closed eyes, Thomas spotted security guards, early arriving employees, even cleaning staff pausing in their work to listen. They stood at a respectful distance, drawn by the unexpected sound of classical music flowing through the normally quiet building. Richard Parker and the other executives had fallen silent, their smug expressions replaced by shock. Harold, the client they'd been trying to impress, had moved closer to the piano, watching Thomas's hands with undisguised admiration. But Thomas played for none of them. He played for Elena, who had believed in his talent until the end. He played for Zoe, who deserved to see her father as more than just the man who cleaned up after others. And he played for himself, for the musician who still lived inside the janitor's uniform, who still dreamed in melodies and harmonies. The piece built toward its climax. Thundering bass notes contrasted with delicate runs in the upper register. Thomas's body was now fully engaged, his shoulders rising and falling with the music's intensity. A light sheen of sweat formed on his forehead as he poured everything into the performance. He had forgotten where he was, forgotten the risk he was taking. For these precious minutes he existed only within the music, whole and unbroken in a way he hadn't felt since before Elena's illness. As he approached the final section, Thomas became aware of more movement at the edges of his vision. The elevator doors had opened again. More people were arriving for the morning, but one figure stood apart from the others. A woman in a tailored suit who stepped forward, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Something deeper. Thomas didn't falter. The final passages of the ballad poured from his fingers, technical, demanding, emotional. The last chords resonated through the lobby, hanging in the air for a long, suspended moment before fading to silence. Complete silence. Thomas sat motionless, eyes closed, hands still resting on the keys. The trance-like state that had carried him through the performance slowly dissolved, bringing him back to reality, to the executive floor, to his janitor's uniform, to the audience he hadn't intended to gather. He became aware of his breathing, heavy from the exertion and emotion, of the slight tremor in his hands, of the complete absence of sound around him. Then, from somewhere behind him, a single sob. Thomas turned slowly on the bench. The small crowd that had gathered stood frozen, as if afraid that movement might break the spell his music had cast. Security guards, early morning employees, the cleaning staff who knew him only by sight, all staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to wonder. Richard Parker's mouth hung slightly open, his earlier smugness replaced by disbelief. David and the other executives looked equally stunned. Harold, the client they'd been so eager to impress, was nodding slowly, his eyes bright with unexpected emotion. But it was the woman standing slightly apart from the others who had made the sound. Middle-aged, with silver streaks in her dark hair, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, she stood with one hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. Thomas recognized her from company photographs displayed in the lobby. Catherine Chen, the CEO of Eastwood Financial. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly, standing up from the bench. "I should get back to work." His voice seemed to break the spell. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Thomas felt his face flush with embarrassment. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not at work. Catherine Chen stepped forward as the applause continued, wiping tears from her cheeks with an elegant handkerchief. "You're the night janitor," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident on her face. "Yes, ma'am," Thomas replied. "Thomas Rivera." "And you play like that?" It wasn't a question, but Thomas nodded anyway, unsure what else to do. "Where did you study?" Harold asked, moving to stand beside Catherine. "That technique. That wasn't self-taught. Colburn Conservatory," Thomas said quietly. "I didn't finish." Richard Parker had regained his composure enough to force a laugh. "Well, that was unexpected. Now, about our meeting." "The meeting can wait," Catherine said firmly, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. "Mr. Rivera and I need to talk." Thomas felt a flutter of panic. Was he about to be fired? Had he crossed some invisible line by revealing this part of himself? "My daughter is sick at home," he said quickly. "I need to get back to her soon. My neighbor is watching her, but—" "Of course," Catherine nodded. "Family comes first. But please, 5 minutes in my office before you go?" Thomas glanced at his watch. If he kept it brief, he could still make it home by noon as promised. He nodded. As the crowd reluctantly dispersed and the executives led Harold toward the conference room, Thomas followed Catherine to her corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, now bathed in mid-morning sunlight, so different from the nighttime view he usually saw during his shifts. "Please. Sit." Catherine gestured to a chair across from her desk. Thomas perched awkwardly on the edge, still in his work uniform, feeling out of place among the tasteful artwork and elegant furnishings. "That piece," Catherine said, sitting down across from him. "Chopin's Ballade. My father used to play it." Thomas nodded, unsure how to respond. "He worked in a factory his whole life," she continued, her voice softer now. "But he had studied piano as a young man in Taiwan before immigrating here. He never had the opportunity to pursue it professionally, but he played every evening after dinner. Just for us. For himself." She picked up a small framed photograph on her desk and turned it to face Thomas, an elderly Asian man seated at an upright piano smiling at the camera. "He died last year," Catherine said. Hearing that piece again, played with such feeling, it was like he was here. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm sorry for your loss." "How long have you worked here, Mr. Rivera?" she asked, setting the photograph down gently. 3 years, since my wife passed away." Catherine nodded as if something had been confirmed. "And before that?" "I taught music at a private school. Before that, I was at Colburn studying piano performance." "What happened?" The question was direct but not unkind. Thomas rarely spoke about his past, but something in Catherine's expression, the shared understanding of loss perhaps, made it easier. "Life happened," he said simply. "My wife and I had our daughter. Medical bills, student loans. Teaching paid the bills until Elena got sick. After she died," he shrugged. "Night janitor pays better than substitute teaching. Has benefits. Lets me be there for Zoe during the day." Catherine was silent for a moment, studying him with an intensity that made Thomas want to look away. But he held her gaze, no longer the invisible man who cleaned floors while others slept. "Mr. Rivera," she said finally, "I believe we need to talk further about your position here at Eastwood Financial. But not now. Go home to your daughter. Take care of her. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon? Say 3 p.m.? Thomas hesitated. "I'd need to arrange childcare if Zoe is still sick." "Bring her," Catherine said immediately. "We have a wellness room she can rest in while we talk. And I have 3 kids of my own. A sick child is never a problem here." "Thank you," Thomas said, standing. "I should finish cleaning the—" "Go home, Mr. Rivera," Catherine said firmly. "Your work here is done for today." As Thomas left her office, he caught a glimpse of the conference room where Richard Parker was speaking animatedly to Harold and the other executives. Harold wasn't listening. Instead, he was looking through the glass wall at Thomas, giving him a small, respectful nod as he passed. Thomas stepped off the bus 2 blocks from his apartment building, the morning sun warming his back. The events at Eastwood Financial felt dreamlike now. The grand piano, the stunned executives, the tears in Catherine Chen's eyes. Had he really played Chopin in front of the company CEO while wearing his janitor's uniform? The weight of his backpack, containing his work clothes and lunch container, reminded him that it had indeed happened. As did the business card Catherine had pressed into his hand before he left, her direct number scrawled on the back in elegant handwriting. Tomorrow at 3, she had reminded him. And really, bring your daughter if needed. The neighborhood was quiet on a weekday morning. A few elderly residents sat on their stoops, enjoying the pleasant weather. Mrs. Delgado from the corner bakery waved as he passed, and Thomas waved back. The familiar rhythm of his life here, a stark contrast to the rarefied air of the executive floor. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, muscles aching from the night's work and the intensity of his unexpected performance. Opening the door quietly in case Zoe was sleeping, he found Mrs. Chen in the living room, knitting while watching a cooking show on low volume. "How is she?" Thomas asked, setting down his backpack. Mrs. Chen smiled. "Better. Fever broke around 9. She ate some soup and has been sleeping since." Thomas thanked his neighbor and walked her to the door. "You look different today," Mrs. Chen observed before leaving. "Something happened at work?" Thomas hesitated. "Maybe. I'm not sure yet." After Mrs. Chen left, Thomas checked on Zoe. She was asleep in her small bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and books. Her cheeks were no longer flushed with fever, and her breathing was deep and regular. Relief washed over him. He gently placed a hand on her forehead, cool to the touch. Thomas showered and changed into worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, then made himself a sandwich. As he ate, he thought about Catherine Chen's invitation. What did she want to discuss about his position at Eastwood Financial? Was this a polite way of letting him go for disrupting the workplace? For embarrassing Richard Parker? His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Rivera, this is Catherine Chen. I hope your daughter is feeling better. I wanted to let you know that Harold Mills has asked about you twice today. I think you've made quite an impression. Still looking forward to our meeting tomorrow." Thomas stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Why would the CEO text him personally? And why would this Harold person, clearly an important client, ask about a janitor? He typed a simple reply. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. Zoe is improving. We'll see you tomorrow at 3. The rest of the day passed quietly. Zoe woke around noon, still tired but hungry. Always a good sign. Thomas made her favorite chicken soup from scratch and sat with her on the couch watching cartoons, her head resting against his shoulder. "You're home early," she observed during a commercial break. "Did you get fired?" Thomas laughed. "No, sunshine. Your school called and said you won a special award for being nosy." She giggled and poked him in the side. "Dad, seriously, why are you home?" Thomas hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "Something happened at work. I played the piano there." Zoe's eyes widened. "The big one you told me about? The shiny black one? That's the one. Was it amazing? Did it sound like you said it would?" Thomas smiled, remembering the rich tones, the perfect action of the keys. "Even better. Did people like it?" "I think they did," the boss lady cried. Zoe sat up straighter, suddenly interested. "You made your boss cry? With music? Like sad crying or happy crying?" "Maybe a bit of both," Thomas said. "Her dad used to play the same song." Zoe nodded sagely as if this explained everything. "So you're not in trouble?" "No, actually, we have a meeting with her tomorrow. If you're feeling better, you'll come with me." "A meeting with the boss lady?" Zoe's eyes grew even wider. "Do I have to dress up?" Thomas laughed. "Just be yourself. That's always good enough." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the morning's events. After years of hiding his talent, of being invisible as he cleaned around the executives who never gave him a second glance, he had revealed himself. And now what? Best case scenario. Catherine Chen was impressed enough to offer him some kind of music-related position. Worst case, she felt obligated to have a proper goodbye after his performance touched her, but was still letting him go. Thomas sighed and reached for his phone. It was nearly 1 a.m., the time he would normally be cleaning the executive floor. He opened a browser and typed Catherine Chen Eastwood Financial into the search bar. The results showed a remarkable woman. Catherine Chen had taken over as CEO 5 years ago when the company was struggling. Under her leadership, Eastwood had transformed from a traditional financial services firm to a technology-forward industry leader. Articles described her management style as compassionate but uncompromising and deeply people-focused. One interview particularly caught Thomas's attention. When asked about her hiring philosophy, Catherine had said, "I don't just look at resumes. I look for people whose life experiences have given them unique perspectives. Some of my best executives came from non-traditional backgrounds. Thomas set his phone down, a small flicker of hope kindling in his chest. The next day, Zoe insisted on wearing her fancy dress, a purple outfit with sequins that Elena had bought her for a cousin's wedding. Her fever was gone, though she still had a slight cough. Thomas wore the only button-down shirt he owned, paired with his least-worn jeans. "We look good," Zoe declared as they examined their reflection in the hallway mirror. "Like a team. The best team," Thomas agreed, smoothing her hair. They took the bus to Eastwood Financial, Zoe chattering excitedly about seeing where her dad worked and meeting the boss lady who cried. Thomas felt strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. Whatever happened in this meeting, he had shown his true self, both as a dedicated father and as a musician. That alone felt like a victory. The daytime security guard did a double-take when Thomas approached the front desk with Zoe. "Rivera, aren't you on night shift?" "Meeting with Ms. Chen," Thomas explained, showing the text message on his phone. The guard's eyebrows shot up, but he nodded and made a quick call. Moments later, they were directed to the executive elevator, a plush, wood-paneled car that Zoe declared was fancy enough for a princess. Catherine's assistant, a young man with kind eyes, met them when the elevator doors opened. "Mr. Rivera and Miss Rivera," he greeted them warmly. "Ms. Chen is expecting you. Can I get either of you something to drink? Water, juice, coffee?" Zoe looked at Thomas, wide-eyed at being addressed so formally. "Apple juice?" she whispered. "Apple juice for my daughter and water for me, please," Thomas said. The assistant led them to a comfortable waiting area outside Catherine's office. "She's just finishing up a call. Shouldn't be more than 5 minutes." True to his word, Catherine emerged from her office exactly 5 minutes later. She looked different than she had the day before, more approachable somehow in a simple blouse and slacks rather than the formal suit. "Mr. Rivera," she smiled, extending her hand. Then she crouched down to Zoe's level. "And you must be Zoe. I've heard you were feeling under the weather. Doing better today?" Zoe nodded solemnly. "I had a fever, but now I'm just a little coffee. Dad makes the best soup." "I bet he does," Catherine smiled. "Would you like to see something cool while your dad and I talk? My assistant Ben can show you our game room. We have it for employees' kids when they visit. There's a big TV, video games, books." Zoe looked at Thomas questioningly. "It's okay," he assured her. "I'll be right in there." He pointed to Catherine's open office door. After Zoe had gone with Ben, happily chattering about her favorite games, Catherine led Thomas into her office. It felt different in the afternoon light, warmer, less intimidating. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a small seating area by the window rather than the formal desk. "Your daughter is beautiful." "Thank you," Thomas said, sitting down carefully on the edge of an armchair that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "She's everything to me." Catherine nodded, her expression softening. "I can see that. Family is precious." She paused, studying him. "Mr. Rivera, Thomas, I want to be direct with you. What happened yesterday was extraordinary. Not just your playing, which was at a professional level, but the circumstances." Thomas waited, unsure where this was heading. "Harold Mills," Catherine continued. "The client who was with Richard Parker. He's the CEO of Mills Investment Group. They signed with us yesterday afternoon, a contract worth millions. Harold told me your performance was what convinced him." She smiled slightly. "He said any company that could have talent like yours hiding in plain sight must have depths worth exploring." Thomas blinked in surprise. I'm glad it helped the company. It did more than help. But that's not why I asked you here." Catherine leaned forward. "I've been looking over your employment file. 3 years of perfect attendance. Supervisor evaluations that praise your thoroughness, reliability, and discretion. And now I discover you're a classically trained pianist who gave up a promising career to support your family." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "Thomas, I believe in second chances. My father never got one with his music. He went from working in a factory in Taiwan to working in a factory here. His talent was confined to our living room." Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Eastwood is changing. We're expanding our community investment programs, particularly in arts education for underserved youth. We've been looking for someone to lead this initiative. someone with both artistic background and real-life experience. She turned back to face him. "I think that someone could be you." Thomas stared at her, certain he had misheard. "Miss Chen, I'm a janitor. I don't have a completed degree or—" "You have something more valuable," Catherine interrupted gently. "Talent, yes, but also perspective. You understand what it means to set dreams aside for practical reasons, to prioritize family over ambition. Many of the children our program aims to serve face similar choices. They need someone who understands their reality, not just their potential." Thomas felt lightheaded. Was this really happening? "What exactly are you offering?" "Director of Arts Outreach," Catherine said. "Developing and overseeing music programs for local schools and community centers. Working hours that would let you be home for Zoe in the evenings. And," she smiled, "occasional performances at company events if you're willing." Thomas looked down at his hands, calloused from years of manual labor, yet still able to bring music to life. Hands that had cleaned floors at night and made soup for a sick child by day. Hands that could perhaps help other children find their own music. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say you'll think about it," Catherine replied. "Talk it over with your daughter. This would be a big change for both of you." From the doorway came a small voice. "Dad should say yes." They turned to see Zoe standing there, Ben the assistant looking apologetic behind her. "She insisted on checking on you," he explained. Zoe walked into the room with the confidence of a child who knows she's right. "You should say yes, Dad. You're happiest when you're playing. And you always tell me to use my talents to help people." Thomas looked at his daughter, so much like her mother in her certainty, her clear-eyed view of the world. Then he looked at Catherine Chen, who was offering him something he'd thought was forever out of reach. A second chance. "When would you want me to start?" he asked quietly. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the wings of Eastwood Financial's event hall, adjusting his tie for the third time. The company's annual charity gala was about to begin, and for the first time he would be on stage rather than cleaning up after it ended. "You're going to wear out that tie," a small voice said beside him. Zoe, dressed in a new blue dress with a silver headband holding back her curls, looked up at him with amused eyes. "And you're doing the finger thing again." Thomas realized he was tapping an invisible piano on his leg, a nervous habit Zoe never failed to notice. He smiled and crouched down to her level. "How do I look?" he asked. "Like a real director," she nodded approvingly. "Not like a dad who burns toast." "I burned toast once," Thomas protested. "This week," Zoe corrected with the devastating honesty of a 10-year-old. A gentle tap on his shoulder made Thomas stand. Catherine Chen, elegant in a simple black dress, gave him an encouraging smile. 5 minutes, she said. "The donors are all seated. And Thomas, they're excited to hear you play." The past 6 months had transformed Thomas's life in ways he still couldn't quite believe. As Director of Arts Outreach at Eastwood Financial, he had traded his mop and cleaning cart for an office on the 52nd floor. Not quite the executive level, but with a view that still took his breath away some mornings. The job itself felt custom-made for him. 3 days a week, he visited local schools to establish music programs in neighborhoods that had lost funding for arts education. The other 2 days, he worked from the office planning curriculum, coordinating with teachers, and occasionally playing the grand piano in the lobby during lunch hours. Best of all, his new schedule meant being home every evening with Zoe. No more night shifts, no more sleeping during her school hours. They had dinner together, helped with homework, and on weekends explored the city in ways his previous schedule had never allowed. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight was the formal launch of Eastwood's expanded community arts initiative, a program that would bring music, theater, and visual arts to thousands of children across the city. And Thomas was not only the program's director, but also its showcase performer. "Dad?" Zoe tugged at his sleeve. "Is Mrs. Patel here?" She really wanted to come. Thomas smiled. Mrs. Patel was Zoe's music teacher at school, one of the first educators to embrace the Eastwood program. Front row with her husband. "I saw them arrive earlier. And Joe? From your old job?" "Second row, looking uncomfortable in a suit," Thomas confirmed. Zoe nodded, satisfied that everyone important would witness her father's moment. Then she threw her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Mom would be super proud," she whispered. Thomas felt his eyes sting with sudden tears. He hugged her back tightly. I know, Sunshine. She's watching somewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, Catherine's voice came through the speakers as she took the stage. Welcome to Eastwood Financial's annual charity gala. Thomas listened as she spoke about the company's commitment to community investment, about the power of arts education to transform lives, about the importance of giving children not just skills but dreams. 6 months ago, Catherine continued, I had an unexpected experience right here in our building. I heard music, extraordinary music, coming from our lobby at an unusual hour. What I discovered changed not just how I view our company, but how I understand the hidden talents all around us. From the wings, Thomas could see the audience leaning forward in their seats. In the front row, Harold Mills, now a major donor to the Arts Initiative, nodded appreciatively. The musician I heard that morning wasn't a guest artist or a visiting dignitary. He was a member of our maintenance staff, a night janitor who cleaned our offices while most of us were home with our families. A man who had put aside his extraordinary talent to care for his daughter after losing his wife. A man who reminded me that greatness often exists where we least expect it. Catherine gestured toward the wings. Please welcome to the stage the new director of our Community Arts Initiative and the inspiration behind its creation, Thomas Rivera. The applause startled Thomas with its enthusiasm. He gave Zoe a quick wink, then walked onto the stage, blinking slightly in the bright lights. From here, the audience was mostly shadows, but he could make out familiar faces. Catherine's family in the front row, Joe the night security guard giving him a thumbs up, Mrs. Chen from his apartment building beaming proudly, and in the back, looking slightly uncomfortable but undeniably present, stood Richard Parker and the other executives who had once mocked him. Thomas approached the microphone. He had prepared a short speech, but looking out at the audience, at the journey that had brought him to this moment, he decided to speak from the heart instead. 6 months ago, I stood in this building wearing a different uniform. Holding a mop instead of a microphone, he began quietly. I was invisible then, just the man who emptied the trash and polished the floors. But even then I carried music with me. It lived in my heart when I couldn't afford a proper piano. It stayed with me through night shifts and hard times. It was the one thing I could always give my daughter. Even when I couldn't give her much else, he paused, letting his gaze move across the audience. The truth is, we all carry something special inside us, something that defines who we really are beyond our jobs or circumstances. For some, it's music. For others, it's writing or painting or teaching or healing. The tragedy isn't when life forces us to set those gifts aside for a while. The real tragedy is when we forget we have them at all. Thomas glanced toward Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. This program isn't just about teaching children to play instruments or paint pictures. It's about showing them that their talents matter, that who they are matters, no matter where they live or what challenges they face. Every child deserves to know that their gifts are worth developing, worth sharing, worth believing in. He stepped back from the microphone, suddenly aware that he was speaking to a room full of wealthy donors and corporate executives about things they might never have experienced. But the silence that greeted his words wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, almost reverent. Now, he said, finding his smile again, I believe I was asked to play something tonight. The grand piano waited at center stage, its lid raised to project the sound. Thomas sat down, adjusting the bench slightly. This wasn't the lobby piano he'd played 6 months ago, but a concert grand brought in specially for the event. Its keys gleamed under the spotlight. I'd like to play 2 pieces tonight, Thomas said. The first is the Chopin ballade that some of you heard that morning in the lobby, the piece that changed my life. His fingers found the opening notes, and the familiar music filled the hall. But unlike that morning 6 months ago, Thomas played now not from a place of hidden identity, but from one of full recognition. His technique was still flawless, his interpretation still deeply emotional. But there was a new confidence in his performance, the assurance of a musician who knew his worth. As the final notes of the ballade faded, the audience erupted in applause. Thomas waited for it to subside before speaking again. The second piece is one I composed myself, he said softly. It's called Zoe's Moonsong. I wrote it as a lullaby when my daughter was a baby, and I've played it for her throughout her life, on keyboards, on out-of-tune pianos in music classrooms, and sometimes just humming it when we had no instrument at all. He looked toward the wings where Zoe stood watching, her face a perfect mixture of embarrassment and pride. Recently, I had the chance to develop it into a full composition. Tonight will be its first public performance. Thomas closed his eyes and began to play. The melody was simple at first, a gentle, comforting theme that evoked moonlight and whispered bedtime stories. But as it developed, it grew more complex, incorporating elements of joy and sorrow, struggle and triumph. It was Elena's laugh in the triplet figures of the right hand, Zoe's determination in the steady pulse of the left. It was night shifts and morning pancakes, piano dreams and practical sacrifices. It was their life together, beautiful not despite its hardships but somehow because of them. When the final chord resolved, Thomas opened his eyes to find the audience on their feet. In the wings, Zoe was jumping up and down, clapping wildly. Catherine Chen stood beside her, one hand dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. As Thomas stood to acknowledge the applause, Catherine and Zoe joined him on stage. Zoe ran to hug him and he lifted her up, her arms tight around his neck. "You made the boss lady cry again," she whispered in his ear. Thomas laughed. "Happy tears this time," he assured her. Catherine stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you can understand now why our arts initiative is in such capable hands. With your support tonight, we hope to bring this same opportunity for creative expression to thousands of children across our city. Children who, like Thomas once did, might be keeping their talents hidden because life has given them other priorities." She turned to Thomas and Zoe. "But talents like these shouldn't remain hidden. They deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be celebrated." After the applause died down and the formal program moved on to dinner, Thomas and Zoe found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Harold Mills shook Thomas's hand firmly, promising additional funding. Joe, the security guard, proudly introduced Thomas to his wife as the best pianist I've ever heard in person. Even Richard Parker approached, looking somewhat chastened. "That was extraordinary, Rivera. I owe you an apology for how we treated you that morning." Thomas studied the man who had once tried to humiliate him. 6 months ago, Richard's opinion had seemed all-important, the executive with the power to endanger his livelihood. Now he was just another person with his own insecurities and limitations. "No apology needed," Thomas said sincerely. "Without that moment, I might still be cleaning floors at night." Later, as the event wound down and the guests began to depart, Thomas found himself alone at the piano again. The event staff was beginning to clear tables, working around the remaining guests with practiced efficiency. He watched them with newfound appreciation, seeing the careful choreography of their work with different eyes now. "Play something else, Dad?" Zoe had appeared at his side, sleepy but reluctant to leave. Thomas patted the bench beside him and she climbed up, leaning against his shoulder as his hands found the keys again. This time he played softly, not for the audience or the donors, but just for his daughter. Just for them. From across the room, Catherine watched the father and daughter at the piano, the janitor who had become the heart of her most meaningful initiative, the man whose hidden talent had reminded her why she had wanted to lead this company in the first place. Real change, she reflected watching Thomas and Zoe together, didn't always come from grand strategies and corporate initiatives. Sometimes it came from simply seeing people for who they truly were, not for the uniforms they wore or the jobs they held, but for the gifts they carried inside them, waiting for their moment to shine.